Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. The morning of my promotion ceremony, I couldn't stop staring at my uniform. Every button polished, every fold sharp. It was the first time in years my whole family would be in the same room, at least pretending to be proud of me. My name is Natalie Vance. I'm 37, and I've spent the last 16 years serving in the U.S. Navy. Today, I was supposed to become Captain Vance, but nothing about this day would go the way I expected. The ceremony was held at the Naval Station in Norfolk, Virginia, where I'd been stationed for the last 3 years. Rows of chairs lined the hall, filled with both strangers and familiar faces. My commanding officer, Admiral Lindstrom, stood at the podium, clearing his throat. I stood at attention, trying to focus on his speech, but my eyes kept flicking toward the doors. I spotted my mother first. Her hair was curled tight, her lipstick too red, smiling like we were still close. She was seated between my cousin Lucy and my older brother Christopher. Just seeing him there made something tighten in my chest. I hadn't seen Christopher in almost 5 years. The last time we spoke, it ended with slammed doors and raised voices. He was wearing a dark gray suit today, sober, serious. The only thing out of place was the manila envelope resting on his lap. It wasn't large, but it was thick enough to catch my eye. My stomach churned. I glanced at Raymond, my husband, standing near the back. He gave me the smallest nod. Calm, steady. A reminder that no matter what happened, I wasn't alone. Admiral Lindstrom's voice echoed, "And now, it's my great honor to welcome to the stage Lieutenant Commander Natalie Vance, soon to be Captain Vance." As I stepped forward, I heard the applause, light but genuine. I walked slowly toward the Admiral, my heart pounding. The insignia was ready in his hand, the moment hanging in the air like a held breath. And then, "Excuse me," Christopher's voice rang out from the third row. "Before you proceed." The applause faded. People turned. I stopped mid-step. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he continued, standing now, the envelope in his hands. "But I have reason to believe this ceremony is based on false information. This woman is not who she says she is. Her name is not Natalie Vance." Someone in the back gasped. A few murmurs broke out. Admiral Lindstrom's brow furrowed. I turned toward my brother fully now, expression unreadable. I said nothing. Christopher came forward slowly, pulling papers from the envelope. "Her real name is Natalie Morgan. I have documentation to prove it. Records of a sealed identity change, photographs, classified correspondence." He held them up as if flashing a badge. Some officer moved to take the papers, scanning them quickly. The murmuring grew louder. My mother looked stunned, turning to Lucy in confusion. Still, I didn't say a word. Admiral Lindstrom looked at me. "Lieutenant Commander Vance, is there any truth to this?" I didn't respond. I held his gaze for a second, then turned toward Christopher, who now stood beside 2 base security officers. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just said, "We can do this the easy way." I nodded once. The 2 officers stepped forward. One of them gently took my arm. I didn't resist. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people stood. My mother had her hand over her mouth now, her eyes wide. Lucy just stared, pale and frozen. As the officers walked me past my family, past Admiral Lindstrom, past the room full of stunned faces, I glanced at Raymond one last time. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just met my eyes and gave the smallest shake of his head. He wasn't surprised, and somehow neither was I. The room cracked open, not literally, but that's what it felt like after Christopher's accusation. The weight of his words hadn't even fully landed before the crowd began to unravel. Murmurs exploded into full-blown whispers, the ceremony dissolving into scattered voices and strained silence. Admiral Lindstrom stepped back from the podium. He glanced between me and my brother like he couldn't decide whether to issue a command or call security. Meanwhile, Christopher, calm and cold, opened his manila envelope and laid the contents across a nearby table like a magician showing off the final act. "This is everything," he said. "Birth certificate, sealed federal name change request, travel orders under the name Natalie Morgan. Photographs, some of which were never meant to be seen." He said that last part with a faint smirk, like he had just won a bet with himself. My mother stood up slowly, her mouth half open, staring at me like I'd shapeshifted right in front of her. "Natalie," she said, her voice cracking. What is this? What's going on?" I met her eyes. She looked afraid. Not of the situation, of the implications, like the truth might be contagious. "Is that true?" Lucy asked beside her, looking between me and Christopher. "Natalie Morgan?" I didn't speak. I hadn't since Christopher stood up. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew better than to offer clarity to people who didn't know how to hold it. Christopher kept his show going. She lied on multiple enlistment documents. She's not even eligible for this promotion, and she's deceived the Navy and our family for over a decade. I glanced at the table. The photos were spread out, some from years ago. One of them showed me in a crowd of unfamiliar faces in Istanbul, another in front of a truck with a UN emblem. He'd really done his homework. Or hired someone who had. He gestured to the security officers again. She should be escorted out immediately. She's under federal investigation. One of the officers reached for my arm, but before they touched me, a firm voice cut through the noise. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Heads turned. A man in full dress, white, stood at the back of the room, posture straight, eyes locked on Christopher. His medals glinted in the light. My breath caught before I even registered his face. Raymond. He walked forward, calm but radiating authority. The same quiet control I'd seen in him 100 times. "Remove your hand from my wife," he said, voice even. Christopher blinked. "Excuse me?" Raymond reached into his breast pocket and slowly produced an ID badge. Fleet Admiral Raymond Vance. Retired, Naval Intelligence. He turned to the security officers. "You will not touch her again." They backed off. Just slightly, but enough. The room went still again. The shift was subtle but immediate. My mother sat back down. Lucy's expression changed from confusion to something closer to awe. Raymond looked at me, just for a second, and then turned back to Christopher. "You made a mistake." Christopher tried to speak, but the words caught. For the first time, he didn't look so confident. I still hadn't said a word. I didn't need to. Raymond was doing the talking now. Raymond's presence was like flipping a switch. The room that had been buzzing with whispers and accusations now hung heavy with hesitation. Christopher's mouth was open, like he wanted to respond, but the words hadn't formed yet. "I said," Raymond repeated, his tone sharper now, "remove your hand from my wife." The officers looked from him to Christopher, uncertain. I watched without moving, still flanked by security, still calm. I hadn't said a word since the moment my brother rose to speak, and I didn't plan to start now. Christopher finally stepped back, dropping his hand from my arm like it had suddenly become radioactive. His face was tight, pale in a way that wasn't just anger, it was calculation crumbling. Raymond walked up beside me, his dress shoes clicking on the polished floor, then turned to face the room. "For those of you who don't know me," he said clearly, "I am Admiral Raymond Vance. I served 32 years in Naval Intelligence. I retired 3 years ago, though some of you might recall the final report I submitted on Operation Drakewell. That got the room's attention. Several heads turned. That wasn't a name you brought up lightly." Raymond shifted his stance, directing his next words at Admiral Lindstrom. "The woman you were about to promote is my wife, and everything she has done in service to this country has been under full clearance, reviewed and approved by the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Department of Defense." He reached into his jacket and handed Lindstrom a sealed folder. "That's her redacted file. You'll want to start there before you entertain whatever amateur investigation this man has put together." Admiral Lindstrom looked stunned, but took the file. He flipped through the top few pages, then looked up with narrowed eyes. Christopher tried to speak. "You can't just—" "I can," Raymond cut in, his voice like steel. "You're not law enforcement. You're not military. And from what I just saw, you violated at least 2 protocols by displaying classified material in a public forum. Do you even understand the potential charges for that?" Christopher's lips moved, but no words came out. Behind him, our mother sat frozen, clinging to the edge of her chair. Raymond turned to the 2 officers who had been stationed beside me. "Uncuff her." They hesitated. "That wasn't a request." The younger one stepped forward quickly and removed the cuffs from my wrists. I flexed my fingers, the red marks still fresh but fading. Raymond looked down at me, then back to the audience. "You all came here today to celebrate a promotion. What you witnessed instead was the result of a vendetta, a personal grudge dressed up as patriotism. But that ends now." He put a hand lightly on my back. "Let's go." As we walked past Christopher, he didn't look at me, not once. His jaw was clenched tight like he was choking on the silence. The audience, once skeptical, now shifted their eyes toward him instead of me. And for the first time that day, it wasn't me they were doubting. It was him. The night before the ceremony, I stood in front of my childhood home with a bottle of red wine in one hand and a knot in my stomach. I hadn't seen them all together in years, The front porch still creaked the same way when I stepped on it. Same cracked tile near the door. Same porch light flickering like it had better things to do. Inside, the air smelled like pot roast and lemon cleaner. I walked into the dining room, smiled politely, and took the only empty seat, right between my mother and Christopher. "Look what the cat dragged in," Christopher said without looking up from his phone. "Nice to see you too," I said, folding my napkin. My mother turned and gave me a quick once-over. "No ring?" I didn't answer right away. "Just asking," she added, slicing into her roast like it had personally offended her. "You're not getting any younger, you know." I reached for the wine glass. "Didn't realize there was an age cap?" "Well," she said, gesturing around the table, "we just don't know much about your personal life." That wasn't an accident. That was a cue. And I let it hang there. Lucy looked up from across the table and offered a tiny, almost apologetic smile. At least someone was trying. Christopher leaned back, swirling his glass. "So, overseas again, huh? Where this time?" "Norfolk," I said. He laughed. "No, I mean before that. Didn't you disappear to Europe for a year? Or was it the Middle East?" "Both," I said. "Different years." My mother cleared her throat. "You know, I was telling Judith at the salon how proud we are of you. But it's hard when people ask where you are and we have no idea." "You could call," I said. "Oh, don't be like that," she replied, frowning. "You know what I mean." I did. They didn't want to hear where I was. They wanted to control how it sounded to other people. Christopher leaned forward. "You ever gonna tell us what exactly you've been doing over there? Or is that all hush-hush too?" I shrugged. "That's above your clearance." He snorted. "Oh, come on. What are you, some kind of spy now?" "Something like that," I said, sipping my wine. He kept pushing. "I mean, we know your name's on some DOD stuff. You've been vague. Because I'm supposed to be. But you changed, Natalie. You don't even talk like the same person." He wasn't wrong. I had changed. That was the part that made him nervous. "I grew up," I said. "Right," he muttered. "Grew up into someone none of us recognize." There it was. The truth behind every jab, every backhanded compliment. I didn't fit into the version of family they still clung to. I had broken the pattern. I had stepped out of place, and they didn't like it. By the time dessert came, nobody was talking. The TV was on in the living room. Christopher was already checking his emails again. My mother scraped plates with too much force. I offered to help clean up. She waved me off. "You've got a big day tomorrow?" she said. "Don't wear yourself out." I nodded, walked upstairs, and shut the guest room door behind me. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. I didn't look like them. I didn't sound like them. And no matter what happened at the ceremony, I wasn't going to be the daughter they wanted. I was something else entirely. The garage door creaked shut behind Christopher, swallowing the sounds of the house inside. Mom in the kitchen clinking plates, Natalie upstairs in the guest room, probably pretending she couldn't hear any of it. He locked the deadbolt, flipped the overhead light, and walked past the boxes of holiday decorations and old paint cans until he reached the far workbench. The folder was right where he left it. Manila, thick, sealed with a strip of black tape. He opened it slowly, carefully, like he was unwrapping a gift he'd been waiting to give for years. He pulled out the first document, a photocopy of a birth certificate. Natalie Morgan, not Vance, not the name she'd worn like a medal. Christopher smiled. Not the warm kind of smile. The cold, practiced kind. The kind that showed up when you were about to prove a point that had simmered inside you for too long. He pulled out his phone and hit redial. "She's still here," he said. "I've got the files ready. Tomorrow morning. It's all happening in front of the brass." A pause. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. She sat across from me at dinner tonight like nothing was wrong. Like we were just two regular siblings catching up over roast beef. I could barely look at her." He reached for a second file, this one filled with photographs. Natalie, or rather Morgan, in fatigues overseas. One was time-stamped just months before her so-called first tour with the Navy. Another showed her standing outside a secure embassy gate with someone who, if you knew how to look, was CIA. "She reinvented herself," he muttered into the phone. "Built her entire career on a lie. But tomorrow, I take that lie apart piece by piece." He pulled out the flash drive from the folder and slid it into the old laptop he kept in the garage. Up popped a presentation. Time-stamped files, comparison images, classified headers stripped bare. "She's always been one step ahead of this family. You know what Mom said tonight? That she hoped Natalie would finally settle down. He laughed bitterly. Settle down, like any of us know who she actually is. Another pause. Number, I'm not nervous. She can't talk her way out of this. Not in uniform. Not with the evidence I've got. He stood up, breathing heavier now, tension tightening his shoulders. I don't care if she's family. Someone like that doesn't get to walk away clean. He ended the call, shut the laptop, and returned everything to the envelope. Then, calmly, he walked over to the cabinet and slid it into the lockbox tucked behind a stack of old tax records. He shut it tight, turned the key. Outside, the crickets chirped like nothing had changed. Upstairs, Natalie rehearsed a short speech she'd probably rewritten a dozen times. Something about duty and honor. And in the garage below, Christopher smiled in the dark. Tomorrow, he thought, the truth finally wins. The ceremony was already off balance when Christopher stepped back onto the stage. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask to speak. He just took the mic like it belonged to him. I know the Navy prize is honor, he said, but today we're celebrating a lie. Murmurs scattered like wind in the room. Admiral Lindstrom stood frozen off to the side, the folder Raymond had given him still in his hands. A few rows back, I saw a lieutenant glance nervously at her seatmate. I stayed quiet. I didn't blink. Christopher didn't notice. He was too busy playing prosecutor. He raised a tablet and tapped it once. Behind him, a projector screen came to life. This, he said, pointing, is Natalie Morgan. Not Natalie Vance. Natalie Morgan, who disappeared 17 years ago and reappeared under a different name, a new identity, and somehow found herself fast-tracked into a Navy officer's career. A photograph appeared on the screen. Me, younger, hair pulled into a tight bun, standing outside a Red Cross tent in Iraq. Then another, boarding a C-130 in civilian gear, passport in hand. Then a document, my sealed name change form, redacted but still damning in the right context. She's lied on every federal form since the day she enlisted, Christopher continued, and she's done it under the guise of serving her country. The whispers grew louder. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, officers, enlisted men, civilian guests, my own mother 2 rows back, her mouth partly open. Lucy had stopped breathing altogether. Christopher turned back to the audience, voice rising. You want to know what kind of person she is? She hid her entire past from the Navy and from this family. What kind of officer does that? He paused dramatically. For impact, I stood still. That pause was his mistake. Because just as he was about to continue, the side door opened with a click. A woman in dress whites stepped into the room. Tall, angular, every movement precise. Her name tag read, Ling, Commander Ava Ling. Her reputation preceded her. Naval intelligence, internal compliance. She didn't attend ceremonies, she investigated them. Mr. Morgan, she said, loud enough for the room to hear, I'll need you to step away from that microphone. Christopher turned, surprised. Excuse me? You are not authorized to present classified documentation in this forum, she said flatly. Nor are you permitted to disclose sealed intelligence under Title 10 protections. What you've just done violates at least 3 federal codes. He laughed nervously. Wait a minute, You've released redacted materials without clearance. You've identified an intelligence officer by her birth name in a public setting, she continued. And if I'm not mistaken, you're not an enlisted agent of any branch. Now the audience wasn't whispering anymore. Now they were watching him. Commander Ling walked toward me and stopped 2 feet in front of Christopher. Natalie Vance's service record is sealed because her work is classified. As of this moment, you're under federal review for breach of protocol. Security will escort you to the holding room. Christopher looked around the room like someone had played a trick on him. You can't be serious. I'm absolutely serious, Ling replied. 2 officers moved toward him, and that's when the shift happened. The faces in the crowd, once suspicious, wary, now turned toward my brother. They weren't just confused anymore. They were skeptical. As Christopher was led out, he kept glancing back like he still expected someone, anyone, to defend him. No one did, and I still hadn't said a word. Back at the house, it felt like the air itself had turned thick. The blinds were drawn. The casserole dishes from the post-ceremony celebration sat untouched on the dining room buffet. My mother stood by the sink, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tile. No one was eating, no one was saying much at all, until she finally broke the silence. I just don't understand, she said. her voice sharper than it needed to be. How could you keep something like that from your own family? I was sitting at the edge of the couch, back straight, hands folded. I hadn't taken off the uniform yet. What part, Mom? I asked quietly. The name I was born with, or the life I chose? Her jaw tightened. Don't do that. Don't turn it around like we're the problem here. Lucy sat in the armchair beside me, tense but quiet. Christopher, of course, wasn't home. He was probably still answering questions in a holding room somewhere. Your brother was trying to protect the family, my mother continued. He didn't do it to hurt you. He thought something was off. He was concerned. Concerned, I repeated. So concerned that he built a case behind my back and tried to destroy my career in front of 300 people. She didn't answer. I looked around the room. My cousin Henry, who hadn't said 2 words to me in 5 years, was suddenly fascinated by his shoes. Aunt Roberta looked like she was praying for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. No one wanted to meet my eyes. I served 16 years without one incident, I said. I never asked you to understand the work I did. I just wanted you to trust that I had my reasons. And now we're supposed to just forget everything? My mother asked. Pretend like this didn't happen? No, I said calmly. You don't have to pretend anything. You just have to live with the fact that it did. That stung her. I saw it, but still, no apology, no ownership. Just the same tired sadness she always wore when I refused to be the version of me she understood. A minute later, she stood up and quietly left the room. Lucy waited until the others filtered out, until it was just the two of us. Then she sat beside me and sighed. You know, she said, I don't think they ever really wanted to understand you. They just wanted to be able to explain you. I looked at her, surprised. They always made it sound like you were off playing soldier, she went on, but I knew it was more than that. I just didn't know how much more until today. I nodded. It's okay. You weren't supposed to. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time that day, someone meant it. I leaned back on the couch, letting her words settle. The house was silent again, but for once, I wasn't afraid of that silence. I knew it meant they were finally out of questions, and I was finally done answering them. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes of the drive. The hum of the highway filled the silence between us, broken only by the occasional tap of Raymond's fingers on the steering wheel. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the road. I stared straight ahead, still in uniform, still feeling the pressure of a room full of people, even though we were long gone from it. You handled that better than most admirals I know, Raymond finally said, voice soft. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't handle anything. I just stood there. Exactly, he replied. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. I glanced over at him. He kept his eyes on the road, his profile calm, unshaken. Even after all these years, there was something about the way he carried himself, still and solid, like he could hold the weight of the world and never flinch. Do you ever wonder if we should have told them? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the next exit and pulled onto a quiet back road, one lined with pine trees and evening mist. They wouldn't have understood, he said. And they didn't want to? Even Lucy? I asked. Lucy's the only one who tried, he said. The rest of them? They don't want the truth. They want the version of you they can explain to their friends. One they can put in a Christmas letter. I let that sit for a moment. He was right, of course, and hearing it out loud made it sting less. I never wanted to lie to them, I murmured. But every time I tried to be honest, I watched them flinch like I was a stranger. Raymond slowed the car and pulled into a small overlook facing the bay. The water glimmered in the dying light. He cut the engine, letting the silence settle again. You've carried this alone for a long time, he said. And I let you. I thought it was your choice. But now, you don't have to carry it by yourself anymore. I nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Even if the truth never gets spoken, especially then, he said, because silence doesn't mean weakness, Natalie. It means you know when words will cause more damage than good. I leaned back against the headrest, my shoulders easing a little for the first time all day. Raymond reached over and took my hand, the gesture quiet and certain. You're not alone in this, he said again, like a promise. And for the first time since everything collapsed, I believed him. The hearing room was nothing like the ceremony hall. No applause, no gold insignia on velvet. Just dull gray carpet, steel chairs, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. At the front of the room sat 3 officers in uniform, stern-faced, with the weight of military law behind them. 2 flags flanked the dais, American and Navy. I sat alone at the table, facing them. Behind me were maybe a dozen observers, uniformed personnel, legal aides, Raymond, and a handful of people who once looked up to me. Now they weren't sure what they were looking at. And in the front row, with his arms crossed and jaw set, was Christopher. He had the audacity to wear his Navy Reserve blazer, even though he'd never been active duty a day in his life. The lead officer, Rear Admiral Monroe, cleared his throat and leaned forward. Lieutenant Commander Natalie Vance, this tribunal has convened to determine the extent of your alleged misconduct, including falsification of identity, improper disclosure, and unauthorized conduct under classified status. I nodded once, silently. You've elected not to offer a verbal defense, he continued, but you submitted a file this morning through Rear Admiral Vance. Would you like to confirm the authenticity of that evidence? I met his eyes. Yes, sir. He opened the folder. For a moment, the room went still except for the turning of pages. I didn't look at Christopher. I didn't have to. They were looking at what I'd given them. Redacted communication logs, internal memos, and a sealed addendum from Naval Intelligence Command, authorized only the night before. It tied everything together. My classified work, my name change, and most importantly, the security breach tied to Christopher 3 years earlier. A covert mission had gone sideways in Syria. 2 Navy SEALs killed. An encrypted transmission intercepted and leaked. The source was never made public. Until now. The final page of the file listed the communication trace, routed through a private server in Virginia, registered to Christopher Morgan. Rear Admiral Monroe looked up, his expression unreadable. You are aware this implicates your brother directly, he said. I nodded. Yes, sir. And you've sat on this information since 2021? Yes, sir. Why? I folded my hands. Because exposing it would have meant revealing everything else, including operations that were never supposed to exist. A long pause followed. The weight of that silence was different than all the others I'd carried. This one was earned. Admiral Monroe turned to the panel. Whispered conversation passed between them. After several minutes, he spoke again. Lieutenant Commander Vance, he said, you are cleared of all accusations. The charges against you are dismissed. He turned toward Christopher. As for Mr. Christopher Morgan, civilian status pending review, you are hereby referred to the Department of Defense for criminal investigation regarding the unlawful possession and dissemination of classified materials and your potential involvement in the 2021 Operational Compromise. Christopher stood up, mouth open. Wait, this is a setup. Raymond rose, expression unreadable. Sit down. Security stepped forward. Christopher flinched but didn't fight it. As they escorted him out, he looked over his shoulder, straight at me. You ruined me, he hissed. I didn't say a word. I just watched him go. He wasn't wrong, but he'd done it all on his own. The tribunal ended quietly. No applause, no headlines. Just paperwork and protocols and a room that finally saw the truth. And for the first time in years, I stood up with nothing left to prove. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that sits in your chest long after you leave. I stood near the back, just past a row of white markers. Rain had come through that morning, leaving the grass soft beneath my shoes. A few birds fluttered between the trees, but otherwise, it was still. I wore civilian clothes for the first time in weeks. No medals, no rank. Just a black coat and a simple pair of boots that sank slightly into the wet ground. In front of me stood a marble headstone etched with the name of a man most people had forgotten. But I never did. Staff Sergeant Adrian Wolfe. Killed in action. March 11th, 2021. No spouse, no kids. Just a mother too ill to fly out for the funeral. And a classified operation that didn't make it into the papers. He was one of the two. Raymond stood a few steps behind me, hands folded, silent as always. He didn't need to be close. He knew I needed this space. I kneeled and laid the single white rose beside the stone. Not because I owed Adrian something, but because I had carried the weight of what happened that night. The fallout, the silence, the consequences. Christopher had played a role in Adrian's death. That much the tribunal now knew. But what they didn't know, what I had chosen not to reveal, was how close it had come to being worse. Adrian had intercepted something before it reached our team. Had he not, the count might have been 6 names instead of 2. I could have told the tribunal everything. I could have named names, connected dots, shown exactly how deep the failure ran. But I didn't, because I knew what that kind of truth would cost. Not just Christopher, but everyone who still clung to the belief that he was one of the good ones. My mother, my uncle, our entire hometown, where his framed ROTC certificate still hung in the high school hallway. They needed their version of him, just like they needed their version of me. I stood up slowly, brushing off my palms. The sky had cleared, but the wind still bit against my skin. Raymond walked toward me. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, you didn't have to protect him, not after everything." "I didn't do it for him," I said quietly. "I did it for the ones who can't protect themselves. People like Adrian." Raymond looked out over the rows of headstones. "And your family? They'll believe whatever makes them feel safe," I said. "If that means pretending none of this ever happened, fine. Let them. I don't owe them the truth anymore." We started walking back toward the car. I took one last look over my shoulder at the headstone. "Will you ever tell them?" Raymond asked. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not today." He nodded, understanding. As we pulled onto the road, the city faded behind us. The news cycle had already moved on. The tribunal's final statement had been a single page, dry and clinical. Christopher's name wouldn't appear in any headlines. His disgrace would be quiet. So would my survival, and in a world that demanded explanation, demanded answers, demanded noise, I chose silence, and I knew exactly how powerful that could be.